"Get on your knees before I make this a very bad day," the police officer shouted, his voice cutting through the humid afternoon like a siren before anyone had even realized something was wrong. Conversations outside the neighborhood convenience store died instantly. Shopping bags stopped swinging. Car doors remained half open. Every pair of eyes turned toward the parking lot, where Officer Ryan Walker stood with rigid confidence, one hand raised in a commanding gesture as he confronted a woman wearing a charcoal hoodie, dark jeans, and worn sneakers. She hadn't taken a single step toward him. She hadn't raised her voice. She simply stood beside a silver rental SUV with one hand visible and the other holding a slim leather wallet against her side. The late summer sun reflected off windshields, filling the asphalt with blinding flashes of white light, while distant traffic hummed across the boulevard. Ryan had built a reputation as the officer who never hesitated. Around this part of Georgia, people admired certainty more than patience, and Ryan carried himself like a man who believed hesitation was weakness. His polished badge gleamed against his navy uniform, while his mirrored sunglasses hid every trace of emotion except the confidence written across the tight line of his jaw. Several bystanders quietly reached for their phones, sensing that whatever was unfolding would soon become something everyone wanted to remember. The woman slowly lifted her eyes toward him. Calm, steady, unshaken. She looked to be in her early 30s, African-American, composed in a way that felt strangely out of place amid the growing tension. Sweat clung lightly to the edge of her forehead after walking several blocks through 90-degree heat, yet her breathing never changed. She glanced briefly toward the entrance of the convenience store, then back to Ryan, almost as if checking whether someone else had safely remained inside. That tiny movement escaped everyone except the elderly cashier watching nervously through the front window. "Sir," the woman said quietly, her voice measured enough that those nearest had to lean closer to hear it. "I'd appreciate the chance to explain." Ryan laughed, the sound carrying farther than her words ever could. Everybody wants to explain after they're caught. A few uneasy chuckles rippled through the small crowd, though most people simply watched in uncomfortable silence. The woman gave a nearly invisible nod, accepting that nothing she said would matter yet. Instead of arguing, she slowly extended the leather wallet forward using only 2 fingers. "My identification is inside." Ryan stepped closer without taking it immediately. His expression hardened as though he had already reached his conclusion before seeing a single document. "Keep your hands where I can see them." She obeyed without complaint. A warm breeze drifted through the parking lot, rustling a faded American flag above the gas pumps, while the distant rumble of thunder hinted at an approaching evening storm. Everything about the moment felt suspended, as though time itself had paused to watch one decision unfold. Finally, Ryan snatched the wallet, flipped it open, and immediately burst into open laughter. He held up the gold credentials for everyone nearby to see, shaking his head in disbelief. "An FBI badge?" he said loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "That's the funniest fake I've seen all year." Several people exchanged uncertain glances. The woman never reacted. Her face remained composed, almost impossibly patient, as if she had expected those exact words before stepping into the parking lot. She looked once more toward the convenience store entrance, then quietly met Ryan's eyes. Somewhere in the distance, the faint echo of approaching engines rolled across the city, still too far away for anyone to notice, but close enough that the next 2 minutes would change every life standing in that parking lot. Naomi Brooks had learned years ago that panic usually spread faster than truth. She stood exactly where she was, shoulders relaxed, hands visible, allowing the afternoon heat to settle over her without letting it reach her thoughts. The pavement radiated warmth through the soles of her sneakers, while the faint scent of gasoline drifted from the pumps behind her. Around the parking lot, curious faces multiplied by the second. "Hey!" Teenager balanced his bicycle near the curb without taking his eyes off the scene. An elderly couple paused halfway to their sedan with grocery bags hanging from their hands. Inside the convenience store, the cashier remained frozen behind the register, pretending to organize receipts while secretly watching every movement through the glass. Naomi ignored every stare. She had experienced enough undercover assignments to know that crowds rarely understood what they were witnessing until everything was over. She also knew something Ryan Walker did not. Less than 100 yards away, Inside that ordinary neighborhood store, a frightened accountant sat quietly in the back storage room, with two United States Marshals waiting for a secure transfer. The man had spent nearly 3 years collecting financial records that tied a respected real estate developer to a network of public corruption stretching across 3 counties. The meeting had been arranged with extraordinary care. No marked vehicles, no uniforms, no public attention. Naomi had arrived alone in a rented sport utility vehicle because the safest operation was usually the one nobody noticed. She had parked, purchased a bottle of water, and quietly confirmed that the witness had arrived safely. Everything had gone according to plan until Officer Walker spotted an unfamiliar vehicle, recognized neither the driver nor the federal assignment, and decided to investigate on his own. Naomi had considered identifying herself immediately, but experience had taught her that revealing federal credentials too early sometimes created more problems than it solved. Local agencies were often informed only when absolutely necessary, especially when investigators could not rule out information leaks. This operation carried that exact concern. Someone inside local government had been feeding confidential details to the organization under investigation for months. Every unnecessary conversation increased the risk that the witness might disappear before sunset. Ryan flipped through the credentials again, searching for flaws that were not there. His confident smile only grew wider. He held the badge high enough for several people nearby to glimpse its gold shield reflecting the afternoon sunlight. "Anybody can order one of these online," he announced, sounding more interested in entertaining the growing audience than examining the identification itself. Naomi watched him carefully. She noticed the tiny details most people missed. His breathing had become slightly quicker. His jaw tightened every time another phone appeared in someone's hand. He wanted control more than clarity. That realization saddened her more than it surprised her. She thought about her father, a retired deputy sheriff who had spent 32 years reminding young officers that respect always arrived before authority. He used to tell her that a badge was never supposed to become the loudest voice in the conversation. Standing beneath the relentless Georgia's sun, Naomi silently wished Ryan had been taught the same lesson. She slowly drew a careful breath before speaking again. "Officer Walker, I am asking one more time. Please contact your dispatcher and verify my identification." Her tone remained respectful, almost gentle, but the words carried a quiet certainty that contrasted sharply with the nervous whispers spreading through the crowd. Ryan barely glanced up before closing the leather wallet with a dismissive snap. "Nice try," he replied. "You picked the wrong officer to fool today." Naomi said nothing else. She simply looked once toward the store in trance again, hoping the witness remained safely out of sight as the distant sound of approaching engines grew just a little louder. The whispers around the parking lot grew louder with every passing second, spreading from one stranger to another until speculation became louder than the traffic beyond the intersection. Some believed Naomi had been caught committing fraud. Others assumed she had stolen the vehicle parked beside her. Nobody knew the truth, yet nearly everyone felt certain they understood the story unfolding before them. Ryan Walker stood at the center of that certainty. Years of praise from grateful citizens and local headlines celebrating his quick decisions had shaped him into a man who trusted his instincts more than inconvenient facts. Only a week earlier, the city council had recognized him for outstanding service during a community safety ceremony. His framed certificate still rested on the front desk at the precinct where fellow officers congratulated him as someone who never backed away from difficult situations. Ryan genuinely believed he was protecting his community. That belief made it even harder for him to imagine that he could be making a mistake. He tucked Naomi's credentials beneath one arm and glanced toward the growing crowd with quiet satisfaction, noticing the approving nods from several onlookers. Their attention strengthened his confidence. He was no longer simply verifying an unfamiliar identity. He was performing certainty before an audience. Naomi recognized the shift immediately. She had interviewed enough public officials throughout her career to understand how easily pride could become louder than judgment. Her eyes drifted toward the reflective windows of the convenience store where the afternoon sunlight turned the glass into a mirror. For a brief moment, she caught the faint outline of movement inside. One of the marshals discreetly adjusted the back door curtain before disappearing from view again. Good, she thought. The witness was still secure. Every minute that passed increased the importance of keeping him hidden. The corruption investigation had already stretched across 11 months, uncovering shell companies, fraudulent construction contracts, and millions of taxpayer dollars quietly redirected through fake consulting firms. More importantly, investigators believed someone with access to local law enforcement communications had repeatedly warned suspects before search warrants could be executed. That possibility explained why Naomi had arrived without announcing herself to anyone outside the federal task force. The fewer people who knew her schedule, the greater the chance that the operation would survive the day. Ryan looked over the badge once again before holding it between two fingers with an expression of open disbelief. "You expect me to believe this?" he asked loudly. Naomi answered with the same calm she had maintained from the beginning. "I expect you to. Verify it." Her response was simple, almost understated, but it carried a quiet confidence that unsettled several people standing nearby. An older veteran wearing a baseball cap embroidered with the words United States Army frowned thoughtfully. "Seems like checking would not hurt," he muttered under his breath. Ryan either did not hear him or chose not to. Instead, he clipped his radio microphone closer to his shoulder, but never pressed the button. Naomi noticed that small decision immediately. Verification remained only inches away, yet pride stood directly between him and the truth. A warm gust carried dry leaves across the edge of the parking lot, while gray clouds slowly gathered beyond the tree line. The sunlight faded behind them, softening every shadow until the entire scene felt strangely quieter. Naomi folded her hands loosely in front of her, refusing to match frustration with frustration. She had promised herself long ago that professionalism was not something another person could take away. Around them, more vehicles slowed as drivers noticed the unusual gathering. Several phones remained raised, silently recording every word. Somewhere beyond the intersection, the distant engines she had noticed minutes earlier sounded closer now, low and steady, approaching with deliberate purpose. Ryan remained unaware. He believed the next decision belonged entirely to him. In reality, that decision had already begun arriving from the other side of town. Ryan Walker folded his arms as though the conversation had already ended, his confidence settling over the parking lot heavier than the humid afternoon air. The leather wallet containing Naomi's credentials remained firmly in his hand, while the small crowd continued to grow behind the yellow parking lines. Parents loading groceries lingered beside their vehicles. A delivery driver shut off his engine instead of pulling away. Even the distant chatter from the gas pumps had faded into an uneasy silence. Naomi could almost feel every curious glance resting on her shoulders, waiting for someone to lose composure. She refused to become that person. Her attention drifted once again toward the convenience store. Entrance where nothing appeared unusual from the outside. Behind that ordinary glass, however, a frightened witness was counting on every second of discretion the federal task force could preserve. Naomi knew exactly how fragile that protection had become. One unnecessary scene, one careless decision, one misplaced phone call. Any of those could undo nearly a year of patient investigative work. She slowly inhaled, allowing the warm air to fill her lungs before speaking with the same calm tone she had maintained from the beginning. "Officer Walker, I respectfully request that you return my credentials and verify them through your dispatcher." Her words carried no anger, only quiet professionalism. Ryan answered with a dismissive smile that drew a few uncomfortable laughs from people standing nearby. "You are not making requests anymore," he replied. "You are answering questions." Naomi gave a slight nod. "Then ask them." For the first time since the encounter began, Ryan seemed briefly unsettled by her composure. He had expected excuses, fear, or frustration. Instead, every response remained measured and deliberate. Rather than reconsidering his assumptions, he interpreted her confidence as arrogance. He took another step closer and gestured toward the rental vehicle parked behind her. "Who does this vehicle belong to?" Naomi answered immediately. "The United States government leased it through a federal contract." Ryan shook his head as though confirming his own suspicions. "Convenient answer." He circled slowly around the front of the vehicle, examining the windshield, license plate, and inspection sticker while several spectators stretched their necks to follow every movement. Naomi remained exactly where she stood. She knew that even a harmless movement toward the vehicle could easily be misunderstood, and misunderstanding was already steering the entire encounter. A little girl standing beside her mother tugged gently on her sleeve and whispered, "Mom, why is that lady so calm?" The mother hesitated before quietly answering, "Maybe because she knows something we do not." Those words floated through the still afternoon air without Ryan hearing them. His attention had shifted toward the rear window of the sport utility vehicle where a plain black backpack rested on the back seat. "What is inside the bag?" he demanded. "Case files that belong to an active federal investigation," Naomi replied. "Please do not open it." Ryan smiled again, this time with unmistakable satisfaction. "Now I definitely want to see it." Naomi's expression did not change, but a small weight settled deeper inside her chest. Not because she feared what he would find, but because every additional minute increased the possibility that someone connected to the corruption network might notice the growing public spectacle. Several vehicles had already slowed along the boulevard. More phones were recording. More attention meant more risk. She looked toward the gray clouds gathering above the shopping center, watching the sunlight fade behind them until the parking lot was covered in softer shadows. Then she heard it again. The distant engines were no longer faint. They were steady, organized, and unmistakably approaching from the east. Ryan remained focused on the backpack and never noticed the subtle change in Naomi's eyes. She was no longer waiting for him to make the right decision. She realized that decision had already passed, and the people who could still protect the operation were only moments away. The air felt heavier now, not because the temperature had changed, but because uncertainty had settled over every person watching. Even the distant hum of traffic seemed softer beneath the low gray clouds gathering above the shopping center. Ryan Walker rested one hand on the strap of the black backpack he had just removed from the rear seat of the government-leased vehicle. He studied Naomi with the expression of someone convinced he had finally uncovered the missing piece of a puzzle. Around them, phones remained raised, recording every second. A local news van happened to stop at the nearby intersection after noticing the unusual crowd, though its crew had not yet stepped outside. Naomi remained perfectly still, her attention divided between Ryan and the convenience store entrance. She knew the witness inside could not stay hidden forever. Every passing minute increased the chance that someone connected to the corruption network would recognize the location through social media or a passing message. The entire operation had depended on remaining invisible. Instead, it had become the center of attention on a busy afternoon. Ryan carefully unzipped the backpack while several people leaned forward, expecting dramatic evidence to appear. Inside, however, he found nothing resembling the story he had imagined. Thick folders secured with government seals rested beside a secured laptop, an encrypted satellite phone, and neatly organized evidence envelopes marked with chain of custody labels. Ryan frowned. None of the equipment looked ordinary, yet instead of causing him to reconsider, it strengthened his assumption that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to create an elaborate deception. He held up one of the folders without opening it. "Interesting collection," he said loudly. "Looks impressive." Naomi answered quietly. "Those materials belong to an active federal investigation. Please place them back into the bag." Her request remained calm, almost gentle, but several spectators noticed something different in her voice. It was no longer concern for herself. It was concern for something much larger. Ryan ignored the warning and reached toward the satellite phone. Before his fingers touched it, the device vibrated once across the folder. The sharp electronic tone broke the silence like a pebble striking still water. Every head turned toward the sound. Ryan stared at the unfamiliar device before pressing one of its buttons without answering the incoming call. The display illuminated for only a brief second, but Naomi recognized the secure identification screen immediately. The task force command center was trying to reach her. The call disconnected almost instantly. Ryan shrugged dismissively and tossed the phone back into the bag. "Fancy toys do not prove anything," he declared. Naomi slowly closed her eyes for one brief moment before opening them again. She realized the command center now knew something had interrupted the scheduled check-in. Procedures would already be changing. Somewhere beyond the shopping center, supervisors would be reviewing location trackers, secure communications, and contingency plans. She had seen those protocols activated before. They moved quickly because they were designed for moments exactly like this. A faint breeze carried the smell of approaching rain across the parking lot as the first drops began striking warm asphalt, leaving scattered dark circles beneath parked vehicles. The little girl who had been watching from beside her mother quietly stepped farther back, sensing that the mood had shifted again. Ryan zipped the backpack shut and placed it on the hood of his patrol vehicle with a satisfied nod. "Until someone proves otherwise," he announced confidently. "This equipment is staying with me." Naomi lifted her eyes toward the eastern end of the boulevard. Through the curtain of light rain, she finally saw dark sport utility vehicles rounding the distant intersection in perfect formation, their headlights reflecting across the wet pavement. They were still several blocks away, too far for anyone else to recognize, but close enough that Naomi allowed herself the smallest breath of relief. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply stood with the same quiet dignity she had carried from the very beginning, knowing that the truth was no longer approaching alone. It was arriving with authority. The rain never arrived all at once. It began as a soft rhythm, tiny droplets tapping against windshields, storefront windows, and the warm pavement until the entire parking lot shimmered beneath a thin silver veil. The restless murmurs from the crowd gradually faded as people instinctively stepped beneath the convenience store awning or opened umbrellas from the trunks of their cars. For the first time since the encounter had begun, silence slowly reclaimed the afternoon. Naomi Brooks welcomed it. Silence had always been easier to trust than noise. She stood without moving, tiny beads of rain gathering along the sleeves of her charcoal hoodie before sliding quietly to the ground. Her breathing remained slow and even. She had spent years training herself to separate emotion from reaction because fear often invited mistakes, while patience allowed truth enough time to arrive. Across the parking lot, Ryan Walker leaned against the front fender of his patrol vehicle with the backpack resting beside him. His confidence remained intact, but something inside him had begun to shift in ways he could not explain. The woman standing before him had never pleaded. She had never argued. She had never raised her voice or challenged his authority. Every request she had made had been calm, respectful, and entirely consistent. That quiet certainty lingered in his thoughts far longer than he cared to admit. He glanced once more toward the leather wallet containing her credentials, then quickly looked away, as if refusing to entertain the possibility that he might have overlooked something important. Pride often whispered louder than doubt. Naomi lifted her face slightly toward the gray sky, allowing the cool rain to brush against her skin. The air smelled different now, cleaner, carrying the scent of wet asphalt, fresh grass, and distant pine trees beyond the shopping center. The tension surrounding her seemed to dissolve into the steady rhythm of falling rain. She remembered another rainy afternoon many years earlier when her father had stood beside her outside a small county courthouse after she graduated from the Federal Bureau of Investigation Academy. He had smiled with quiet pride before placing one hand gently on her shoulder. "People will remember how you carried your authority long after they forget your title," he had told her. "Never confuse respect with control. One earns trust. The other only demands obedience." At the time, she had simply nodded. Years later, those words had become the foundation of every difficult decision she made. Standing in the rain, she silently repeated them to herself like a familiar prayer. Around the parking lot, several bystanders gradually lowered their phones. The excitement had faded, replaced by uncertainty. An elderly veteran slowly removed his cap and folded it against his chest while continuing to study Naomi from beneath the awning. The young mother gently squeezed her daughter's hand. "She still is not angry," the little girl whispered. Her mother quietly answered, "Sometimes the strongest people do not need to prove they are strong." Ryan heard only fragments of those words as the drizzle continued falling around him. His radio suddenly crackled with a burst of static before returning to silence. He frowned and adjusted the volume without receiving a transmission. The interruption lasted only a second, yet it was enough to disturb the strange stillness settling across the parking lot. Naomi heard something else beneath the rain. Low, steady, familiar. Multiple engines moving together with disciplined precision. They were close now. Close enough that reflections from distant headlights shimmered across the rain-soaked boulevard beyond the intersection. She did not turn immediately. She simply closed her eyes for one slow breath, then opened them again with the same quiet composure that had never left her. Whatever happened next would not be decided by anger, assumptions, or appearances. It would be decided by facts. And facts, unlike pride, always arrived whether people were ready for them or not. The first black sport utility vehicle emerged through the curtain of rain without flashing lights or blaring sirens. It rolled into the parking lot with deliberate precision, followed by a second, then a third, each stopping in perfect formation along the outer edge of the crowd. Conversations disappeared instantly. Even the steady tapping of rain seemed quieter as every head turned toward the arriving convoy. Ryan Walker straightened, confused more than concerned. The vehicles carried no local department markings, only dark government plates that reflected the gray afternoon sky. Before anyone could speculate further, several men and women stepped out wearing simple business attire beneath lightweight rain jackets. None of them rushed. None of them raised their voices. Their calm confidence carried more authority than any display ever could. The woman leading the group, silver hair neatly tied back beneath the hood of her coat, scanned the parking lot only once before her eyes settled on Naomi. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Special Agent Brooks," she called clearly. Across the wet pavement. "Status report." Naomi answered immediately, her posture unchanged from the moment the encounter had begun. "Primary witness remains secure inside the location. Federal evidence is intact. Local interference delayed extraction, but no classified materials appear compromised." Every word landed with unmistakable precision. The crowd stared in stunned silence. Ryan blinked once, then looked toward the leather wallet still resting on the hood of his patrol vehicle. For the first time since opening it, he seemed to truly see the credentials lying inside. The woman approached without hesitation. She removed a waterproof identification case from inside her jacket and presented it briefly. "Assistant Special Agent in Charge Evelyn Carter, Federal Bureau of Investigation." Her voice remained professional, never rising above the sound of the rain. She turned toward Ryan with measured composure. "Officer, why has one of my agents been prevented from completing an active federal operation?" Ryan opened his mouth, but no answer arrived immediately. The confidence that had filled every sentence only moments earlier seemed to dissolve beneath the weight of facts he could no longer dismiss. I believe the identification was fraudulent," he finally said. Evelyn nodded once, neither angry nor impressed. "Did you request verification through your dispatcher?" Ryan hesitated. "No." "Did you contact the Regional Federal Bureau of Investigation field office?" Again he answered quietly. "No." The silence that followed felt heavier than the rain itself. Around them, several bystanders slowly lowered their phones, realizing they had witnessed something entirely different from what they had first imagined. The elderly veteran removed his glasses and quietly shook his head. The young mother looked toward her daughter, who whispered, "She told the truth the whole time." Evelyn accepted Naomi's leather wallet from the patrol vehicle and handed it back with a respectful nod. "Thank you, Agent Brooks." Naomi slipped the credentials into her pocket without the slightest hint of triumph. Her attention immediately shifted toward the convenience store. "The witness should be moved now," she said. Evelyn answered without hesitation. "Already in progress." At that exact moment, 2 United States Marshals quietly exited through the rear service entrance with the protected witness, guiding him toward one of the waiting government vehicles while remaining almost unnoticed by most of the crowd. The operation continued with disciplined efficiency despite the unexpected delay. Ryan watched the carefully coordinated movement unfold before him, finally understanding that every calm request Naomi had made had been intended to protect something far more important than herself. The rain continued falling gently across the parking lot as the reality of the afternoon settled over everyone present. Authority had never belonged to the loudest voice. It had belonged to the person who never stopped serving the truth, even while standing alone. The witness vehicle disappeared quietly onto the rain-covered boulevard, blending into the afternoon traffic so naturally that anyone arriving a minute later would never have guessed a major federal operation had just continued from an ordinary neighborhood convenience store. The crowd remained where it was, however, held in place not by excitement anymore, but by reflection. The earlier whispers had vanished, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that seemed to weigh on everyone standing beneath the gray sky. Assistant Special Agent in Charge Evelyn Carter watched the departing convoy for a brief moment before turning her attention back to Officer Ryan Walker. Her expression was composed, neither hostile nor triumphant. Years in federal service had taught her that accountability carried far greater weight when delivered with dignity instead of humiliation. "Officer Walker," she said evenly, "please remove your body camera and provide it to the internal review team that will be arriving shortly. Your department has already been notified, and they will determine the appropriate administrative process." Ryan looked down instinctively at the small camera attached to his uniform. Only then did he seem to realize that every decision, every statement, and every opportunity to verify Naomi's identity had been preserved exactly as it had happened. The certainty he had displayed throughout the afternoon quietly gave way to something far heavier. Regret settled across his face with unmistakable honesty. He slowly unclipped the camera and held it carefully in both hands before offering it to one of the federal supervisors, who accepted it without a word. No one celebrated. No one applauded. Justice rarely needed applause when responsibility spoke for itself. Ryan finally turned toward Naomi. Rain continued falling gently between them, softening the edges of the parking lot until the entire scene felt strangely still. For several seconds, he searched for words that refused to come easily. "Special Agent Brooks," he said quietly, "I should have verified your identification. I allowed assumptions to replace procedure. I am sorry." The apology was simple, unpolished, and entirely different from the confident voice that had echoed through the parking lot less than half an hour earlier. Naomi studied him with calm eyes. She saw embarrassment, disappointment, and the painful realization that one careless judgment could damage trust built over an entire career. She did not see hatred. She did not see defiance. She simply saw a man confronting the consequences of his own decisions. "Thank you for saying that," she answered gently. "Every officer makes difficult decisions. What defines a professional is the willingness to let facts lead those decisions instead of assumptions." Ryan lowered his eyes without responding. Those words seemed to reach him more deeply than any public criticism could have. Nearby, the elderly veteran slowly nodded to himself before placing his cap back on his head. The young mother looked at her daughter and quietly smiled. "Remember this," she whispered. "Real strength does not need to embarrass someone else to prove it exists." Naomi walked toward the patrol vehicle and carefully lifted the black backpack from the hood. She checked each evidence seal one final time before closing the zipper and securing the shoulder strap. Everything remained intact. As she turned back, Ryan stepped slightly aside, creating a clear path without being asked. It was a small gesture, but an honest one. Naomi acknowledged it with a respectful nod before passing by. Assistant Special Agent in Charge Carter watched the exchange in silence. She understood that the most meaningful victories were rarely measured by punishment alone. Sometimes they were measured by whether a difficult lesson changed the person who needed it most. Around them, people quietly returned to their cars, lowered their phones, and continued with their afternoon, carrying away a story very different from the one they believed they had witnessed when they first stopped to watch. The rain continued washing across the pavement, carrying away the noise, but leaving behind something far more lasting than embarrassment. It left behind perspective. By the time the rain finally began to fade, the parking lot looked almost untouched, as though the afternoon had quietly washed away every raised voice and every hurried assumption. Water shimmered across the black asphalt, reflecting soft gray clouds that were already beginning to break apart. The federal vehicles departed one by one with quiet discipline, leaving only the ordinary sounds of a neighborhood returning to its routine. Naomi Brooks stood beside her rented sport utility vehicle for one final moment before placing the black backpack carefully onto the passenger seat. She closed the door gently, taking a slow breath as the familiar scent of rain drifted through the cooling air. The operation had survived. The witness was safe. The evidence remained secure. That was all that truly mattered. Assistant Special Agent in Charge Evelyn Carter walked over carrying 2 paper cups of coffee purchased from the convenience store. She handed one to Naomi with a faint smile. "You handled yourself exactly the way the Bureau expects," she said quietly. Naomi accepted the cup with both hands, feeling its warmth against her rain-chilled fingers. "My father used to tell me that calm decisions outlive loud ones," she replied. Evelyn nodded. He was right. Across the parking lot, Ryan Walker remained standing beside his patrol vehicle after nearly everyone else had left. the parking spaces that had been filled with curious spectators. Only minutes earlier now sat empty beneath the fading clouds. He looked older somehow, not because time had passed, but because certainty had been replaced by reflection. As Naomi prepared to leave, she noticed him watching quietly from a respectful distance. She walked over without hesitation. Ryan straightened, unsure what to expect. "I wanted to thank you," he said softly. Naomi looked at him with the same steady expression she had carried throughout the day. "For what?" she asked. Ryan lowered his eyes briefly before answering. "For giving me the opportunity to recognize my mistake before it became something even worse." Naomi remained silent for a moment, listening to the gentle dripping of rainwater from the edge of the convenience store roof. "Every day we wear a badge," she finally said. "Someone is trusting us with their dignity before they ever trust us with their safety. We cannot protect one without protecting the other." Ryan slowly nodded. Those words settled deeply, far beyond the embarrassment of one difficult afternoon. "I will remember that," he answered. Naomi offered a small, genuine smile before extending her hand. After a brief hesitation, Ryan shook it. There was no celebration in the gesture, no victory, only mutual recognition that character is often revealed most clearly after pride has been tested. Naomi climbed into the sport utility vehicle and started the engine. Soft instrumental music played quietly through the speakers as the windshield wipers swept away the final drops of rain. She glanced once toward the convenience store where the little girl who had watched everything unfold stood beside her mother. The child lifted one small hand in a shy wave. Naomi smiled and waved back before driving slowly toward the boulevard. The little girl looked up at her mother and asked, was she brave because she worked for the government? Her mother gently squeezed her shoulder and watched the vehicle disappear into the afternoon traffic. "No," she answered. "She was brave because she never stopped treating people with respect, even when they forgot to give her the same." The clouds gradually opened, allowing a narrow band of golden sunlight to stretch across the wet pavement where the rain had fallen only moments before. The reflections shimmered like quiet reminders that truth does not need to arrive with noise to change a person's heart. Sometimes it arrives with patience. Sometimes it arrives with dignity. And sometimes the strongest form of justice is simply walking away with kindness still intact.